About a month ago, I did a video explaining why the Star Wars prequels are in many ways better than the sequels, and you can find a link in the description to that video in case you'd like to see it. But after I made that video, I got to thinking about the backlash both trilogies have suffered, and I couldn't help but realize that one is usually handled a lot more delicately than the other. Basically meaning that people have no problem bashing and mocking the prequels to no end, but when it comes to criticizing the sequels, it's usually handled with a lot more tact, and with explanations being given as to why it is people feel the way they do that aren't always accurate. And if you're wondering where exactly this is, well, let's just say this happens quite a lot on the sites I had the misfortune to frequent in the past. The prequels are given a free pass to be made out as the worst movies ever made, while the sequels' flaws are emphasized to a minimum and outright praised for real and imaginary strengths. Now, I know this might come as a surprise to some people, because the prequel trilogy has appeared to become more appreciated and reevaluated since the sequel trilogy's release, but unfortunately there are still plenty of people out there who will still mock those movies to no end. And listen, if somebody doesn't like the prequels, that's fine. They're most definitely free to love or hate whatever they want to. But that being said, I really don't think the prequels deserve so much hate. And today, I'd like to explain as objectively as I can why it is I feel that way. And needless to say, spoilers for anything and everything Star Wars are a given, so if you don't want something ruined, you probably know what you should do. Alright, so to start with something we can all agree on, the prequels definitely aren't perfect. And there are plenty of criticisms directed at those movies that are entirely justified. As I've freely admitted before, George Lucas had problems translating his ideas on screen. But that being said, the prequels still have a lot to offer. As many have pointed out, there's actually a pretty good story buried underneath that rough surface, with a moral that's not only extremely universal, but one that's surprisingly relevant to the real world. Because according to Lucas, the moral of the prequels basically boil down to, quote, how easily democracies can fall. And just one reason people didn't like the prequels when they first came out was because they didn't appreciate the Emperor's plan, since it was very dialogue heavy and admittedly a bit hard to understand at times. But after seeing several dictators do basically the same thing he did in real life, many have come to realize just how well those movies have not only aged, but how brilliantly they were actually told in the first place. And not to mention the action. You can say anything else about the prequels, but one can't deny that they easily have the best action scenes of anything in Star Wars. People have even said that the lightsaber fight with Darth Maul was enough to redeem The Phantom Menace for them, as well as the huge, action-packed third act of Attack of the Clones being enough to redeem that movie in the eyes of many people. And let's not even get started on Revenge of the Sith. That nearly 10-minute duel between Obi-Wan and Anakin practically made Revenge of the Sith a blockbuster single-handedly, with even many downright haters of the prequels admitting that it was epic. But that's also where we get to what I believe to be one of the worst and most unwarranted criticisms of those movies. That the fight scenes are over choreographed. And no, that isn't me joking. I have literally seen people tear down the duels between Darth Maul and Obi-Wan and Anakin because they're too choreographed. That the actors are performing moves because they look cool rather than because they make sense. And listen, maybe they did overdo it a bit. But is that really enough to take away from how epic these fight scenes look? I mean, look at this and tell me it isn't the coolest thing ever. I mean, these are Jedi and Sith at the top of their game, so why shouldn't they pull out all the stops when fighting each other? Especially because while the fights in the prequels may have had a lot of moves, they were also what many people missed in the sequels. You don't know how many people I've heard say that they missed the choreography of the prequel trilogy in the sequels. And yet, there are people who still find something wrong with it. And I just really have to wonder, if these fight scenes were in anything but the Star Wars prequels, would those same people really be so quick to complain that they're over-choreographed? Or instead be praising all involved for making such great action scenes? And then there's also things like Anakin and Padme's romance, which is something I've heard even defenders of those movies admit could have been done better. But that being said, people can still take things too far. I even once saw their romantic subplot as being described as, quote, an almost unwatchable love story that takes up a majority of the movie, as well as a love story that's uncompelling. And I just have to say, isn't that a little harsh? I mean, even I'll admit it wasn't done as well as it could have been. But isn't calling it almost unwatchable taking it too far? Was it really that bad? Now listen, you're free to feel about it any way that you want to. I just feel that it's when people say stuff like that they're getting a little irrational with their criticisms. Because I won't get into it here, but as I've already said in numerous videos, if you want to understand what George Lucas was going for, watch the 1940 movie The Thief of Baghdad. As I've said a few times, I never truly understood Anakin and Padme's romance until I saw that movie. But I also think the romance perfectly sums up what the prequels pretty much are. Something that could have been done better, but reveals itself to tell a pretty great story when you look at it a little closer. Because to put it simply, the prequels do have substance. You can tell that George Lucas put thought into this story, and when you look at it close enough, you can tell that it lines up better with the original trilogy than some people would like to admit. And as I argued in my video on Darth Vader, which you can also find a link in the description to, they make a lot of events that go down in the original trilogy all the more meaningful once you actually know what happened. And just for one example of that, I'm sure few would argue that Vader's decision to kill the Emperor in Return of the Jedi carries a lot more weight once you've seen the prequels and see just how thoroughly used and manipulated by the man he really was. To put it simply, the original trilogy presents Anakin Skywalker as a fallen hero. The prequels show that he was actually pushed into villainy, and very much so at that. Okay, so in case I seem a little all over the place here, my point is that while the prequels are most definitely flawed movies, they still have a lot to offer in terms of story, characters, and just plain old action. And I don't think the flaws they do have are enough to warrant the very harsh criticisms they've been given. Now, to be fair, as I noted before, people seem to have let up on them, but plenty still mock every single aspect of them to no end. And as I said before, it's okay to not like a movie. If somebody doesn't like the Star Wars prequels, I've got no issue with them. But at the same time, the lack of respect these movies have received really surprises me. And the amount of respect that some people have shown for the sequels in turn surprises me just as much. Because again, people are free to like whatever they want, and if the sequel trilogy is their thing, I say go for it. All I am saying is that there seems to be this unwritten rule that you can criticize the prequels all you want to, no matter how much it is or isn't warranted, or how brutal it is, while any criticism of the sequels must be handled with kids' gloves. And I'm just going to say it one more time, I don't get it. Because even though I haven't cited many specific examples of it, the prequels do have their strong points. And to finally give an example that might just demonstrate that they are worth something in a nutshell, take the scene in Revenge of the Sith where Yoda confronts the Emperor. The tension in the scene is real. You can feel the stakes of this confrontation, as well as the characters' barely masked hatred of each other. Even knowing how things ultimately have to end, you easily get the feeling that these two are the most powerful of the most powerful, and that they're both ready to absolutely butcher the other in the name of victory. And all the while, the music in the background really makes it feel as if the world is coming to an end, and no matter the outcome of this fight, nothing can truly stop that. And this is only compounded not only by an action scene backing up just how truly powerful both these characters are, but by George Lucas's symbolism of the Emperor using the Senate pods as a weapon against Yoda, which is to show both how he used democracy as a means to his own ends, but also that no matter what happens, scars will be left on the galaxy from this. And for infamously not being able to write dialogue very well, Yoda's line, "If so powerful you are, why leave?" is a pretty epic way to start the fight. Because it shows you in one fell swoop that not only is he not in any way afraid of the man who just slaughtered the Jedi and took over the Republic, but that if there's anybody that can truly stop the Emperor at that point, it's Yoda. And I just have to say, not every movie can successfully achieve that level of emotion and symbolism. Even the sequels arguably don't have a single scene that matches the emotions and tension of that scene. Mainly because we actually know the history of these characters and why they feel about each other the way they do. And again, there are examples of this sprinkled all throughout the prequels, with another famous one being the Opera House scene. Once again, we are not only shown that George Lucas could write good dialogue under the right circumstances, but we also get to perfectly see how masterfully the Emperor manipulates Anakin, preys on his wants and fears, and already has him on a mental leash. Now, of course, some of the credit for how frankly fantastically this scene is done does belong to Ian McDiarmid's perfect performance, but if the material he had wasn't also great on top of that, then there's only so much he could do, as The Rise of Skywalker unfortunately proved. So my point here is, even if the prequels do have their flaws, they still are ultimately well-made movies. If you're able to understand the story George Lucas was telling, then it's very easy to see past their problems and be able to appreciate that, which again, has started happening since the sequel trilogy has come out. But once again, it's still okay to criticize these movies for the flaws they do have, but I just think people took it way too far, and to this day still take it too far sometimes. Because as I said in my prequel versus sequel video, the sequels may superficially look better, but ultimately have nothing to offer, while the prequels are flawed but have substance, and a lot of it at that, and are actually very well made in more subtle regards. And in the end, for everyone who mocks them, I think most people would rather watch flawed but fun and respectful movies that actually have something to say, rather than seemingly great movies that don't really have much to offer beyond unwanted retcons. Alright, I think I'm going to end it there. So now I'd like to hear your thoughts. Do you believe that the Star Wars prequels don't deserve the hatred and mockery they got, and to a degree still get? Or do you believe they're just bad movies that deserve all the criticism they've faced? Please feel free to let me know in the comments below. And as I've already stressed, you can feel any way about the movies and the reception of them that you want to. We are all entitled to our own opinion here, and I'm not going to judge somebody negatively just because they have a different opinion than me. And thank you all for watching. It is very much appreciated, and I hope to see you all next time.